This is Six Music.
BBC Radio 6 Music documentaries, telling the stories in music that matter.
It's what we do.
It's the beauty of Six Music.
Find out more at the 6 Music website. Now, 6 Music documentaries present Record Producers, Tony Visconti.
Some of the record producers in this series began their careers as engineers, others as musicians. Tony Visconti is a member of the latter group. Visconti had met David Bowie shortly after arriving in Britain, producing some of his early Decca recordings, and the two albums Space Oddity and The Man Who Sold the World. Their relationship had come to an end shortly after that in 1970. In 1974, right out of the blue and with Bolan off the scene, Bowie called Visconti and asked him to help mix the Diamond Dogs album. Their partnership was immediately resumed. There quickly followed the rather substandard David Live, and then in 1976, Visconti was off to Philadelphia to produce most of the material that wound up on Young Americans.
It was a very strange experience. David said, "I'm really into black music. I have got the most fantastic band lined up for this next album." This was a transatlantic phone call. And I said, "Great, who is it?" And he said, "Willie Weeks on bass, Andy Newmark on drums, this new guy called Carlos Alomar, he's from New York." And I said, "Say no more, I'll be on the next plane," because I was into black music, of course, and still am. And I arrive in Philadelphia, get to the hotel a little late in the afternoon. I think the session was booked at 4, and I arrived at about 5 at the hotel, and I just ran to the studio, really jet-lagged, and went in and introduced myself, and David wasn't there. Some of the musicians were there, and I went up to someone. I said, "Who's engineering this? Who's the engineer? I'm the producer." And he said, "Oh, you're engineering it." And I said, "What?" And he says, "Yeah, the guys have been here for about 3 days, and they don't like my sounds. And David says, you can get the sounds." And I said, "David's assuming too much, because I'm not really an engineer. I mean, I'm a musician. I know a bit about engineering, and I don't believe..." Oh, yeah, I had just... Yeah, of course, I had built my studio. But, you know, I only knew how to run my own studio, no one else's studio. And, well, there was no question about it. This guy was completely demoralized, and I was put in the engineer's seat as well as the producer's seat. So anyway, David arrived at about midnight. And as you know, he was very thin in those days and living sort of very reversed hours. He was going to bed at about 11 in the morning and all that. However, on that very first night of recording, there was such an electrifying atmosphere in the air that we recorded Young Americans.
They pulled in just behind the bridge. He lays her down. He frowns. "Gee, my life's a funny thing. Am I still too young?" He kissed her then and there. She took his ring, took his babies. It took him minutes, took her nowhere. Heaven knows he'd have taken anything. a young American.
Young American, young American. She wants the young American. All night.
But she wants the young American. Standing right through the picture window, she finds a slinky vagabond. Because as he passes the Ford Mustang, heaven forbid she's taking the thing. But the freak and his title for nothing. This is a step and cuts his hand, showing nothing. It swoops like a song. She cries, where have all Papa's heroes gone?
All night.
She wants a young American.
Young American, young American. She wants the young American. All night.
Well, she wants the young American. All the way from Washington. Her breadwinner begs off the bathroom floor. We live for just these 20 years. Do we have to die for the 50 more? And all night, he wants the young American.
Young American,
Yes, he does.
American. He wants the young American.
All right,
All right.
well, he wants the young American.
At the time that Young Americans was registering in the charts, Visconti was concerned with his own young record and production company, Good Earth. Although he had begun his career as a musician, 7 years of studio work had turned him into a very useful engineer too, and one with fairly strong ideas on what to achieve and how to achieve it. He too has doubts about today's over-sophistication of studios, particularly with regard to 24-track.
I honestly sometimes think 24 is too much. I think the ideal configuration is 16. I was never happier when I worked on 16. What I like to do is something that had to be done in the days of 4-track, is that you only had 4 tracks and you could bounce down from one machine to another by making up something like 7 tracks out of it in the end. For instance, now when I'm going to do a choir consisting of, say, Mary on top and singing a few of the girls' parts with another girl and 2 guys, and say I'll use up 8 tracks. Well, I won't keep those 8 tracks as 8 separate tracks. I will commit myself to a vocal balance and mix them to 2 and put a special effect onto tape. I mean, when I say this in America, for instance, recently as Scary Monsters, I said, I want to record the drums with that sound. I said, yeah, well, we'll just monitor it. We'll do it on the mix. I said, no, we don't do it on the mix. We commit ourselves now. We'll make because every time you put that tape up on the machine, that sound is there, and it can't be changed. You have to make decisions. And I try to use as few tracks as possible by doing these little mix downs, because when it comes time to mix, you just put up those faders, and there are these delightful little mix downs with fade in and fade outs and all that. This is what people do now with 2 24s linked together and using a computer mix down. It takes days and days to program a computer mix down when you could have been making these decisions as you went along. So let's just put it this way. I can do virtually anything in a studio, but using up tracks for the sake of it, no, that's one thing I don't do because it's not necessary.
1975 found him working with Ron and Russell Mael, otherwise known as Sparks. There was always a left-field feel to Sparks, who found a sympathetic accomplice in Tony Visconti and a most unlikely hit with Looks, Looks, Looks.
That was a complete surprise. That wasn't meant to be a single. It was going to be an album track with an old 1930s big band treatment, and it was an absolute joy to record. We recorded it at Rampart Studios, the studio that belongs to The Who, and we got all the old faces from the old Ted Heath band, and I took all my old records out from the 30s, and I did all my research and listened closely to the harmonies and how you have to write for saxes. And one or two things I wasn't sure about. I phoned up a friend of mine who's a brilliant arranger. His name is Bruce Lynch, plays bass for Cat Stevens, and I just asked him a few little tricks that I wasn't sure of how they'd done, and he actually came over and showed me those things. So with a little bit of Bruce's help, I wrote this arrangement. It was so great to walk into the studio and see all these old grey-haired guys, didn't see each other in years. They hadn't seen each other since Ted Heath days, and they all have their Harman cup mutes and big double bass, and this guy has an old F-hole electric guitar, and it was great. And it was like one of those take two syndromes, or take one was excellent, but we just did a take two and sent them all home, and none of the band played on it. Even Ron didn't play on it. We hired an old-fashioned piano player to play that sort of Count Basie type stuff. All you really hear on Looks is Russell, and in the backing vocals are Russell, Mary, Hopkin, and myself doing the Skylark kind of harmonies, the Frank Sinatra Skylark harmonies.
You had sense, you had style, you had cash galore. You employed her and dressed her in formal fashion. Still you bore her because you ain't got a nose that's straight, a set of perfect teeth. You got a built-in seat that makes you look your feet. You know that looks while you rely on books. From the eye to the brain's just an inch or two. From the eye to the heart's only slightly farther. The smart grows smarter, but still can't compete. And they know deep down that they are scarred for life, and that a face can launch 1,000 hips. It's gonna be alright. If it ain't, don't blame me, it's your looks.
At night, she masquerades, her passion covered by a veil of calm. Say, put on your shoes. Say, put on your shoes, no use. One look at her and anyone can tell that she's on fire. Spot her, spot her, spot her.
Well, now she's all over you.
Looks.
No, it's not very hard to make history.
Looks.
Just some cavalry and a good uniform that fits in places where everyone tends to look and marvel at the way you lead them on, and look and marvel at the way you win because of looks. As long as you're not on looks. Spot her ever, spot her ever, spot her ever. Well, now she's all over you.
Looks.
Far away, close at hand, it's the only thing.
Looks.
On the seas, in the sun, any places laced with those who have it, and those who can only look.
Success with Sparks, success with Bowie, but what about his own Good Earth record company and its artists?
It was a very bad period of my life. I took on something. I now know something about myself that I didn't know then, and it's the best thing I do is to produce records, and I don't run record companies well. In fact, I didn't run that record company. I had a partner who ran it for me, and all the Good Earth businesses were failing except for one, which was the production. Good Earth Productions was the only one where the bank account was in the black all the time, constantly in the black. But the Good Earth Records, the Good Earth Management, the Good Earth Artists were all disasters. And it was a 5-year period of my life where I lost Carmen, a group called Omaha Sheriff, who now backed Judy Tsuk. I lost Judy Tsuk. She was on my Good Earth label. A group called the Surprise Sisters. I've just been pulling these albums out recently, and they still sound amazing, and they still break my heart why they didn't make it.
The Surprise Sisters were at the top of Visconti's list of those most likely to succeed, and had at least one excellent single in La Boogaruga.
I think the world of the Surprise Sisters, they were together for years, since birth. Oh, God. And they had been singing for a long time. In fact, there are 12 members of that family, so they already had a Surprise Sisters Mark II set up, lined up, the 4 younger sisters, and then there were 4 even younger brothers. So there were a lot of surprises in that family. And the girls were great. They were fabulous. I can only say this about the whole Good Earth label, is that we had a lot of fine talent that I attracted to the label, and the productions were just on the level of all my other productions. I didn't produce them any differently than I produced David Bowie or Mark Bolan. I was doing the same thing, but I was never so unlucky in my life as when I had my own record label.
In the mid-70s, David Bowie had reached another turning point in his career. There were many who felt that the big fade-out was already taking place, but if he had any future at all, it was probably as an actor.
I'm sure I can say this now without offending David, but he actually came to a part of his life. He just split up with Tony DeFries, and he just about had it with dyeing his hair orange and whatnot. And he said to me, look, I'm not too keen on recording anymore if it means sustaining that Ziggy Stardust image and all that thing, that monster I created. I really want to make an album of music, very uncompromising. Believe it or not, a person on Bowie's level was making tailor-made albums for his fans. It's like the Mark Bolan trap I spoke about earlier. After the Ziggy, which was revolutionary, he kept that image up far beyond the point where he wanted to. And even Young Americans was a kind of insight of David's. He just saw disco happening about a year before everyone else did. And so he slipped in there as soon as possible and did a disco album, which Young Americans is roughly you can say it's one of the very earliest disco albums. It was around the time of Barry White. Anyway, we're getting back to Low. He said, look, I don't care if I make another record again, and I don't care if I have another hit record again, but it's only going to take a month. I've got these strange ideas, and I've booked the chateau in France, if he says it's a total experiment, we might not finish it, it might be all wrong, and it's all I'm asking you. He was begging me to do this, to do Low, and I'm just on the other end of the phone saying, you don't have to beg me, mate, I'll get released. I said, I don't care, mate, if we do it in a front room or we do it in a studio. I just love experimenting with all sorts of musical ideas with you. It doesn't matter. So I went to the chateau, and he had a handful of songs, and virtually those handful of songs ended up being side one, because he didn't have enough for side two. What he did have was the bizarre ideas were putting together musicians who would never come together ordinarily. And it was very catalytic, all these strange people being there all the time. And we created this monster. We created this monster album called Low. So that Tony DeFries, who wasn't even David's manager, even found the album so annoying that he demanded that RCA do not release it because there's not enough of David's voice on it. He really resented side two. And I can't tell you how, before it reached the public, how controversial it was. It was like going back to The Man Who Sold the World. We were just opposed from everybody. We had the hardest time putting that record out on the market. Yet, wisely so, the first single we chose was Sound and Vision, which incidentally, you don't hear David's voice for about a minute and a half. There's about a minute and a half of instrumental, and all of a sudden you hear, "Don't you wonder sometimes?" That's the first thing you hear, is after about a minute and a half. it right down.
Waiting for the gift of sound and vision.
And I will say,
Waiting for the gift of sound and vision.
drifting into my solitude, over my head.
Don't you wonder sometimes about sound and vision?
What we started to do on Low, we definitely developed into a fine art on Heroes. It was more expansive. We used a bigger studio. We recorded the band in Hansa Studios by just 500 yards from East Berlin, from the wall. And every afternoon I'd sit down in that desk and see 3 Russian Red Guards looking at us with binoculars, with their Sten guns over their shoulders and the barbed wire, and I knew that there were mines buried in that wall, and that atmosphere was so provocative and so stimulating and so frightening that the band played with so much energy. I think they wanted to go home, actually. But the songs that came out of that period were just so much more positive. Low, David was going through a very low period. He was sort of splitting up with his wife. He was losing a manager, he was fighting 2 ex-managers, in fact. He was extremely depressed, and it was only the album, Making Low, that was just taking the edge off his depression. And the creative process was just helping him just cope with his life. But when he made Heroes, he conquered that low period, and he was a hero. And he felt like a hero. Every minute of the day he was in the studio. He got up and sang in the microphone on the top of his lungs. You could hear it on Heroes. He calls it Bowie histrionics. He calls it that himself, his own particular style of yelling and screaming. And Hero is a very positive version of Low. We all felt like heroes. It was a heroic album. What more can I say about it?
Heroes followed hot on the heels of Low. In fact, 1977 must have been a very busy one for Visconti, because in that year he also produced the Bad Reputation album for Thin Lizzy, an album title that has several shades of interpretation.
Phil and Scott Gorham walk into my studio in Shepherd's Bush out of a limousine, both carrying large beer cans and being as rowdy as your classic prototype rock and roller should be. And they say, hey, let's get together and make a great album and blah, blah, blah. And Phil says, this is the way I see it. And I'm saying, these guys are out of their skulls. I'm not sure I want to do this now. And I had a very bad beginning to that Bad Reputation album, which was like, it took the form of disciplinary exercise, which I rarely exercise, but I sort of, it was the first time I went on strike. I just phoned, the first week was okay, we got a few things done, but the group was so into raving and going out at nights, and our 2 o'clock starts were becoming again like 4 o'clock starts, 6 o'clock starts, 8 o'clock starts, and the second week was absolutely unproductive. I'm a fairly fit person, and I lead a fairly civilized life and take my vitamins and do my press-ups every morning and all that. And I just couldn't take it any longer. And I phoned up both their managers, who left me with them in Toronto, and they're back in London, you see. So I phoned them up and I said, if you don't get this group on their feet and out of bed on time, I am leaving. I'm not even going in the studio today. I'm warning you, I'm not recording today. As of this moment, I'm on strike, or I'm leaving. It's the first time I pulled this. I'm usually a very nice, lenient guy, but for a whole week of unproductivity, it really, really put my back up and roused my Taurian temper. Well, anyway, it was a great exercise, and I used it again since with other groups who ever get out of hand. I just go on strike. I say, look, I'm a clean liver. Well, a little cleaner than you guys, not too clean. But if you guys get out of hand, I'd say if the session is booked till 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock, I put my coat on at 12 o'clock and I walk out. And if you guys show up at 10 o'clock, I still walk out at 12 o'clock. And this is my approach now, and I am getting such great results, being such a... you know what I mean? And it was the first time I had to do it, but it had a very happy ending, that album. We did about 5 tracks in the first week, then the second week we had the problem. Then the third week, I find myself outside the studio, having Philip teaching me how to play soccer. Being an American, I don't know how to play soccer. Football, as you call it. And in the sunlight and all that, and he was very happy that this whole thing took place. Apparently everybody needed this little bit of a kick, you know. And here we are in the sunshine, and about 1 in the afternoon, playing football out in Toronto, and we decided to go in, and we just put down Dancing in the Moonlight, which was beautifully conceived and beautifully performed, and that was definitely one of the most outstanding tracks on the album, that one was.
When I passed you in the doorway, well, you took me with a glance. I should have took that last bus home, but I asked you for a dance. Now we go steady to the pictures. I always get chocolate stains on my pants. And my father, he's going crazy. He says I'm living in a trance, but I'm dancing in the moonlight. It's caught me in its spotlight. It's alright. Dancing in the moonlight on this long hot summer night. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on the streets again. I disobeyed another warning. I should have been in by 10. Now I won't get out till Sunday. I'll have to say I stayed with friends. Oh, but it's a habit worth forming if it means to justify the end. Dancing in the moonlight, it's caught me in its spotlight. It's alright. Dancing in the moonlight on this long hot summer night. And I'm walking home. The last bus is long gone, but I'm dancing in the moonlight
It should be obvious by now that all the record producers in this series display a wide variety of talents, not only musical and technical. Each artist or group demands a different approach, and if we assume that a producer's prime function is to get the best performance out of his artist and onto tape, a high degree of intuition, patience and empathy is required.
I find now that more than my musical knowledge and more than my technical recording knowledge, I'm using psychology most of the time. I'm creating an atmosphere in which the artist can work under. I can make an artist do things that they weren't able to do 5 hours earlier. I draw great performances out of them. I guide them. Anything I know musically, I just take them aside and teach them a technique that, I draw from my classical experience or my jazz experience to teach them something they were never aware of. Just putting an interesting note in a chord just to change the flavor of it. But mainly it's psyching them, yes. I'm a great psycher. It's not only psychology. The other important thing about record production is making the decisions. You find in the course of one single recording session, if you'd counted them, at the end of, say, 10 hours, you've made hundreds of decisions, major and minor ones, which very few groups are capable of doing themselves. It's hard enough to write the songs, to perform them, and to sing them. But there is an art to record production, and to assume yet one more responsibility is dissipating yourself. And I'd say my contribution is around 50%. I mean, some of the great records that I was involved with, I don't think could have been made if I wasn't there, quite honestly.
In 1978, Visconti worked with another talented group of musicians, the Steve Gibbons Band, but the response to their album Down in the Bunker was most disappointing.
There was absolutely nothing done about that album, no promotion whatsoever. We had a small hit, Eddie Vortex, the closest I ever came to getting a real, genuine 1950s sound. We recorded the drum kit in my spare room at the studio that's full of echo, and it's like a big tiled toilet, for want of a better word. And we only used 2 mics on the drum kit. And lo and behold, apparently that's what they must have done in the 50s, because we got the sound.
In addition to producing artists, Visconti, like Glyn Johns, often mixed albums for others. His reasons for being happy to do so were very similar.
There are so many functions, there are so many processes in recording and producing, right from the beginning of retaining the material to recording it and etc. and directing it and all that. But mixing happens to be one of my favorite, I think it is my most favorite part of the process. It's when everything is on tape. You can't make any more mistakes. You can't even wipe the tape anymore. It's done. It's safe. All you have to do now is make it sound great. And all you have to do now. It's still a very heavy job, but it is most enjoyable because a lot of the tension is gone because you're not looking for performances anymore. This is probably the time when the producer is really performing. And he's performing his bits of alchemy, electronic alchemy, and just hooking up things to other things that were never meant to be hooked up to, and you come up with these bizarre sounds. So there have been a few occasions where people have approached me to mix their albums, and I've taken them on because I personally don't like to work too much, and if I can just get away with mixing somebody's album, I'll do it.
Now, if you thought that producing one album with Thin Lizzy was more than enough for Visconti in view of his experiences, you'd be wrong. In 1979, he tried again with Black Rose. Perhaps in the intervening year, the band had mellowed.
They were going completely crazy during Black Rose. We had another discipline problem. The hotel didn't like us a lot. I was the only French speaker in the party, and I was getting the brunt of all the complaints. Because we had problems galore. We recorded it in Paris at the Pathé Marconi Studios. And the only reason we recorded it there was because the Rolling Stones did their album there, and Phil just said, let's do it there. You know, there's no real great reasons why we go around the world and record in all these places. The main reason is, of course, it saves tax. it saves paying tax. But Black Rose is a fine album. And I think we mutually agreed at the end of it that we had a definite personality conflict.
Hesitate to state the fate that awaits those who try to shake or take you. Don't let them break you. You can do anything you want to do. It's not wrong what I say, it's true. You can do anything you want to do. Do what you want to.
In the late 70s, Visconti definitely appeared to have a taste for producing Irish bands. In addition to Thin Lizzy, there were the Radiators, and then the Boomtown Rats.
We all went down to Ibiza in Spain, one of those little islands off the coast of Spain, where there is this remarkable 48-track studio built by a very remarkable German man called Fritz Ehrentraut. And the Rats were romancing me for about 2 years. The Rats were always coming down to Lizzy sessions, you know, being Irish and the Irish being very together and very chummy and matey and all that. Anyway, Geldof had been trying to get me to produce them for years, and I almost did. I don't like Mondays and all that, but I just couldn't do it. He always would phone up sort of the week before the session, and, you know, it's just impossible sometimes. Finally, I took him out to Spain. They for their tax reasons, they want to record outside of the country. And I took him to this delightful studio, and we made a very nice album. But It was very hard. It was one of the largest groups I produced. And even though Geldorf appears to be the leader, he in fact is a very diplomatic person, and he looks to the other five for any source of inspiration or clue or anything. He's the spokesman, definitely, in public, but in the recording studio, he's 1/6 of the band, believe it or not. And what they needed, which I discovered maybe a little bit too late through the album, is they needed someone to completely dominate them. They never had a producer who completely dominated them. And they were just crying out for direction on every level. And that's not quite me. At the end of 2 weeks, Bob came to me in utter frustration. He said, "Why don't you tell us what to do? Why don't you tell us what to do?" And I said, "Well, don't you know what to do?" He says, "No, we don't know what to do." I said, "Okay, relax. We'll just review everything. We'll start again if necessary." And in this way, we spent rather a long time, but we finished the album.
One of the most outstanding tracks from that Mondo Bongo album was Banana Republic.
I really wanted to stay out of playing on the album and all that, but to keep that track tight, I played a rhythm guitar and sang the backing vocals. I'm one of the high voices in Banana Republic. That's one of me. One of those is me, and arranged that little bit. And that's when I started sort of saying, okay, you really want to be told what to do note for note. I'll do it if necessary.
Banana Republic, Septica, screaming in the Saffron Sea, sounds like crime. Everywhere I go, yeah, everywhere I see, black and blue uniforms, police and breeze. And now what do you want now, while you're sleeping with your whore? Sharing beds with history, it's like a Lincoln running sauce. 40 shades of green, yeah, 60 shades of red. Heroes going cheap these days, price a bullet in the head. Banana Republic, Septica, suffering the screaming sea, sounds like die. Everywhere I go, yeah, everywhere I see, the black and blue uniforms, police and breeze. Take out the leader. In the screaming sea, sounds like die. Everywhere I go, yeah, everywhere I see, the black and blue uniforms, police and breeze. The purple and the pinstripe, the mutely shake their heads, the silent shrieking volumes, violence worse than they condemn. Stab you in the back, yeah, laughing in your face. Glad to see the place again. It's a pity nothing's changed. Banana Republic, Septica, suffering the screaming sea.
One of the patterns that tends to develop in the career of a successful artist is the increasing length of time taken over each album. So we wonder whether Bowie conformed to that pattern.
No, David's taking shorter and shorter now. David is contrary to everyone's conception of a rock artist or a recording artist. The more experienced he and I got, the more experience we had together in the recording studio. We just use it and we get out of there as quickly as possible. We don't like to record more than 6 or 8 hours a day. The Scary Monsters album was finished in 6 weeks, from beginning to end, with a 2-month break. There's something about David. He's very spontaneous, very spot on. It would be anti-David to take months and months to make a recording because it couldn't possibly improve. His voice is hot, and he's always turned on. If he isn't turned on, he just won't work. He won't call in that day. If he's on, he'll walk in the studio and he'll just deliver the most fantastic performance a producer could ever desire.
With the Scary Monsters album, Bowie was back on top again, with at least 2 tracks that were as good as anything he'd ever recorded: Fashion and Ashes to Ashes.
Obviously, Ashes to Ashes took everyone by surprise. It was the first track that was released from the album, before the album came out, and everyone sort of expected one of these bizarre kind of things that came off low, Heroes or larger. And here comes Ashes to Ashes, one of the most conventional pop songs ever written. Very cute verse, very cute chorus, and then there's a devastating stab where he tells the world that Major Tom's a junkie, and he kills off the character he created and glorified 10, 12 years earlier. That was the beauty of that track, that little stab in there, that little surprise. It's a very novel idea of his. He was sardonically looking for some way to get rid of Major Tom once and for all, and he did it.
Ashes to ash and funk to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
By the time of Scary Monsters, Visconti had been producing records for 14 years and developed a highly individual way of leaving his stamp on a production.
I came up from the ranks of musicians. I became a producer through that road, whereas some producers come up from any other angle. Some producers are former engineers, for example, or even former managers. They just come up there and they produce records. They all have their own manner and their own style. But I'm a musician, and I become totally involved in the actual arrangements. And often, if I have a very bizarre idea, and there isn't a musician present who can play it, I can play about 15 instruments, and I can just do it myself, and I often do. And what's happened in recent years, especially with David Bowie, is that we have such bizarre ideas for backing vocals that if you'll notice from low onwards, it's only David and I really singing the backing vocals. And we get up to some very strange vocal acrobatics that not many people can do. I'm also a trained singer. I mean, I could read notes off a page and sing them. David can't read the notes off a page, but he's got a remarkable memory, so we suit each other very well. He can memorize these strange intervals and things. So yes, I do participate. I become a member of everyone's group, virtually. I can't think of an album, in fact, that I haven't played on, or sung a note on, or clapped hands on, or something like that. Sort of like Alfred Hitchcock, I put my mark on it. I walk into one scene, at least one scene, on every album.
Although not too keen on working with artists who were new to the studio, in 1980 Visconti agreed to produce the music for the film Breaking Glass, whose embryo star was Hazel O'Connor. Overcoming his reservations, he worked hard to prepare Hazel for her launch. She was quickly to repay the confidence invested in her.
One night the director came over, Brian Gibson, and said, I've got this great idea for a scene. It's the end of the picture. It's a big concert, and you're singing this very profound song, and you're all dressed up in this makeup, this outlandish gear, and at the end of the song you freak out. It's your swan song. It's a great big production thing, and all that. And you walk off stage, and it's the end of you, and you go bonkers, you go crazy. And I says, "Can you write it tonight, Hazel?" And I said, "Brian, he doesn't know. He just doesn't know." I said, "Oh my God!" So Hazel left it at about midnight, stayed up half the night, came back at about 11 in the morning, and said, "Here's a song, Tony." And she was really bleary-eyed, and it was the 8th day. And it was a brilliant song, and I just touched it up here and there. I made an arrangement out of it. I organized the choruses and the verses, and Hazel and I worked on the slow-down passage in the middle. And crikey, I said, that's the first time I really saw her as a recording artist. She did the impossible. She did what Bowie can do.
On the 8th day, machine just got upset. A problem man had not foreseen as yet. No time for flight, a blinding light, and nothing but a void forever night. He said, "Behold, what man has done. There's not a world or anyone. Nobody left, nobody cried. All that's an end, everyone has died. Forever, amen, amen, amen." He said, "Behold, what man has done. There's not a world or anyone. Nobody left, nobody cried. All that's an end, everyone has died. Forever,
Say if I had 5 flops in a row, my name would be as quickly forgotten as it is remembered now. And I just see it as a very false occupation, one that doesn't have a lot of quality in it. I quickly absorb new techniques and I invent them, and I wouldn't mind teaching a few people how to produce records if they want to do it. There's a lot of keen people who are 20 years old and 25 years old who want to do it. But I don't want to do it much longer. I've done it. And I'm young enough to do something completely different.
round and round and round again, increasing circles. What a fun game! We think we're different, we're not the same as you and he and she and he, and we always believe that we're
Six Music.